Okay, Shah from Bowens. The first question I want to ask you is a sort of a big one, I suppose, which is, what do you want to change in the system within which you work?
In the system in which we work. So I would say, actually, we're looking at the system in which all of us work, and that would be capitalism. Our big focus at Volans is really about addressing the fact that the capitalist market that has been set up, all the flows of capital, is something that really is primed for serious change, and we want to be a part of helping shape that trajectory of change. We won't be able to do it on our own. So one of the things we're really focused on is trying to galvanize and convene the people that do have different roles within the system of capitalism together, and getting them to have a real discussion on what a breakthrough in the model of capitalism would look like.
And what kind of strategies and tactics have you used to do that?
I think the most important strategy we've been able to be a part of, because I won't necessarily say it's us using it on our own, but working in teams of people, would be mapping. We had an amazing mapper come and present at our first Breakthrough Capitalism event here in London back in May of last year. His name's Marshall Clemens. He's from Ideogram, and he was just sensational at, taking these random, I shouldn't say random, but these very divergent parts of a system and putting them into one frame so that everyone who had a different role across that system could see where they sat as well as where they linked with other people that was in the system. So I'd say that actually has been one of the most powerful tools that we've seen used and have been a part of helping shape. The work that Tellis Bader is doing on sustainable capitalism is where Marshall's work has actually come to life. And he's spent time along with the team at Tellis Bader and a whole range of inputs of systems thinkers, I think, here in the UK and beyond, to really input into that map so that it's a comprehensive view of what the current capitalist structure looks like, where those flows of capitals are, and where we can identify points of leverage to change it.
Mm. So linked to that, I guess, so if that's a picture of what the system looks like now, how important do you think it is to articulate a vision for the future?
I think it's hard to have a clear vision for the future that is, broken down into the specifics of what that future is going to look like. What we're really interested in at Volans is figuring out the trajectory for that vision. And that's why we have created sort of 3 scenarios in which we use to sort of point where the different future could lie. It could be a change as usual scenario, which is where we see sort of incremental changes to the system, much of what we're seeing right now, to be honest, when it comes to things like Copenhagen, the Rio conventions. Those aren't the kind of disruptive, transformative changes I think that we all think need to happen. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is breakdown. And as a mother of young children, to me, I don't even like entertaining that scenario because that's the world my kids are going to grow up into. But that could be where the change as usual strategies we're seeing now are actually taking a very different trajectory, and people are almost regressing from an appetite to do things differently. And then there's the breakthrough scenario, which is, again, what we're all about at Volans, which is trying to really be positive and show that there's an opportunity for us to all sort of change how we think and how we interact with the system and create a future which is one in which we're happy and we are able to live within the natural planetary boundaries that are set upon us, and also with a level of equality amongst people. 9 billion people on this planet in 2050 could be a very uncomfortable place for us to live. So in terms of visioning what the future should be, I think our hope and our projection we want to put out there is that we should be aiming for a breakthrough.
Brilliant. And you talked a little bit about your strategies, but do you have a theory of change that sits behind that? So how do you think that change might happen?
I think we haven't articulated our theory of change down to 4 or 5 bullet points, but we have a set of principles and a set of beliefs that we sort of stand true to. I think in order for real systems change to happen, we really need people to be working together. And I think it goes without saying that collaboration is going to be the ultimate fuel or accelerator, or whatever word you want to use, to see the systems actually transform. But to actually get to that level of collaboration, we believe that actually this is about unlocking people as humans and as people. This isn't necessarily bringing people to the table with a corporate logo or a professional hat on. This is about saying we're all people, we're all in this together. So in order to broker the kind of collaboration that's needed, it's almost just the appreciation that we're all humans, we're all in this together. And this is about, our collective future we need to work towards.
Mm. Yeah, that's brilliant. And so you talked briefly about collaboration there. What's your kind of personal relationship with organisations like as a systems changer?
I might actually have to ask you to
Clarify.
what you mean, like relationship in terms of how we work with people, or?
Yeah, so who are your kind of allies and fellow travellers?
Who are our fellow travelers? That's a really hard question because I can't sort of pinpoint and say, here are the organizations that we work with. I mean, there are organizations, we have great relationships that we've worked with a lot in the past with our systems change work, but it really does come down to trust, and it comes down to a shared sense of commitment, and really that's relationships, and so that's people. So rather than saying, we work with this organization and this organization, I'd say we work with this person, and therefore the networks that those people represent as well.
Okay, and so we want to get a kind of picture of what a systems change person does.
Drink a lot. don't record that.
Common theme. And so what we wanted to ask you next was, what did you do last week?
What did I do last week? Actually, that's great. I spent 48 hours in Calgary last week at the Social Enterprise World Forum. I was there with some of my favorite system thinkers in the world, actually, which is one of the reasons why I was excited to be there. These include some of the people I know you guys know at Social Innovation Generation that are connected to Mars in Toronto. Tim Drayman, I have to just do the shout out when we're talking about individuals that really have a capacity to drive some of this stuff into whole new stratospheres. Tim Drayman is one of those people. So what did I do? I spent 9 hours on the airplane on the way over there, getting some work ready that we're planning through at Volans in a new area that we're interested in exploring, which is around corporate venture capital. And these are obviously venture capital funds that exist within corporations. And I was at a summit or a symposium here in London back in the spring and was just blown away by how the people that are in these corporate venture capital funds are starting to actually talk about social issues and system issues, not specifically or explicitly, but they're talking about healthcare services, they're talking about clean technology, and these are like pretty hardcore venture capitalist with a capital C, capitalists in the room. So we're trying to work up a project that would allow us to do some mapping and some interviews with some of those guys and find out, well, how is what their work within corporations starting to connect into some of the other things we're seeing in the bigger system. So the work of the impact investment community, the work of the policy makers that are starting to look into how they can create the right sort of incentives for the growth of social enterprise sector. So that was what I did on the airplane on the way over. Then I got into Calgary and sort of got into the flow of a range of really interesting, both panel sessions as well as plenaries. And I think what really resonated with me at the plenaries was the amount of political power that's being mobilized right now. So we had the former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, talk about the need for a tax credit for social enterprise. And that's an example of that would be a system level change. I guess my frustration is that that's the kind of thing that people have identified over the last couple of years, and it seems it's still in talking phase. And one of my really interesting challenges is how do we take all the talk and all the really great conceptual ideas around systems change and actually translate them into things that are actionable and pragmatic, and that's obviously something we know that the business sector is quite keen for. But yeah, that was my week in Calgary.
Yeah, that's really interesting, thank you. And so how do you think that big business can contribute to systems change?
I think big businesses are part of a system, and in our case, when we're talking about breakthrough capitalism, the role of the big companies, I think, are critical, and that's why I think I wanted the clarification that you're looking at things. If it's London-centric, that's sort of one thing. I think a lot of the work that we try and do has sort of connectivity at a global level, because we see the role of these multinational corporations is actually quite important when we're talking about the level of systems change that's needed in capitalism. I'm glad this is going to be edited because I know I'm rambling a little bit. But and the specific question you want, though, is how big companies can be.
Yeah, how do you think that large corporations contribute to systems change?
Okay. I think large corporations, obviously have a fairly important role to play in the current system. Some of them are recognizing that the system is changing around them, and it's changing in very different ways than I think they have built their strategies for. So in companies like Unilever, you're seeing things like the Sustainable Living Plan, which is really, a great signal of a company that is saying we're going to set very different level of metrics in terms of our contribution and our role in society. But actually, the thing I'm more impressed with at Unilever is their commitment to refuse to provide quarterly shareholder earnings guidance. And to me, that's a real pushback on the current capitalism system. It's like Paul Pullman saying, we don't run our business based on, what's going to happen in the next 90 days. My business plan is for something much longer than that. And to me, that's an example of a company that's actually, having a really interesting pushback onto the system in terms of, how they do their sort of traditional reporting. I probably wouldn't, I'm just thinking, Unilever's kind of one of our partners, so I probably wouldn't want that comment about the Sustainable Living Plan is actually very good. So if I could just focus the comment on one of the things I'm impressed by is their ability to push back on the current financial system by refusing to provide quarterly earnings guidance to their shareholders.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. What we do is record it all and then send it to you.
Okay.
Get that bit of that, just beep that name.
Okay, well, that name probably is one that everyone would know, so, but anyways, yeah. Can I give you another example of the role of corporations? Yeah. So I think one of the examples of corporations being involved in systems change that I've been really impressed by was actually a reaction to the Greenpeace detox campaign that came out a couple of years ago. Greenpeace does what Greenpeace does really well, which is, addressed a pretty serious issue in the wider market, and that was a level of toxicity that was coming up from the supply chains of apparel companies. And rather than their traditional way of responding to a Greenpeace campaign, I was really impressed with how companies like Nike and Puma and Adidas and H&M decided to sort of join forces and say, we're going to respond to this, and we actually realize that there is a change that we need to make in terms of how we manufacture the things that we ultimately sell on to consumers. But not one of us as a single company has the ability to change that whole system because of the complexity of their full value chain. But by coming together as a collective, and I should underscore the fact that this collective was made up of, really competitors, fierce competitors in an industry, but they saw that the system that they wanted to change, which was, how their manufacturers, deal with these hazardous chemicals, was going to only be altered if they were able to actually work together as one force. And so that's why this program, the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals, to me is a really great example of how, hyper-competitors can come together and create these pre-competitive collaborations that drive a level of systems change that can't be seen by one company alone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you think, a lot of systems change, often there's a bottom-up way of doing it to a certain extent, or there's a top-down way. And I guess the working with big corporates, you could characterise it as a kind of a top-down. They're already in a position of power, and then by changing the way that they behave, they shift the relationships within that system.
If I can just respond to that, because I think we talk a lot about the vertical nature of a top-down, bottom-up approach to systems change. But John Elkington, has a great way of throwing a curveball into these kind of conversations. And it was actually a couple of years ago he first started talking about top-down, bottom-up, and then inside-out and outside-in as being actually how we should be engaging with corporations. And I have to say that really has resonated with a lot of the big companies we've worked in. There's an understanding that there will always be a top-down dynamic, just in the nature of the hierarchy in which most multinational corporations operate, where you've got a CEO and a C-suite that makes big decisions. And you need to have those guys bought in, because those are the ones that are going to actually have the power and the authority and the ability to allocate the right kind of resources to make that kind of change, the kind of change happen. But equally, the bottom up is needed. You need to have the buy-in from everyone within the organization, especially those on the front lines who are actually doing the jobs of what those companies stand for. But that almost in itself, the verticality of it is a reflection of the siloed nature, I think, that we get caught up in, and that prohibits us to think about things at a real systems level. So, the addition of the horizontal line almost of, making sure that from the inside of the big companies, you give people a chance to be exposed to what's happening on the outside is really critically important. And equally important is finding ways for those outside forces, those outside partners and stakeholders and inputs to be translated into something meaningful that can be, that can flourish within a big company. So yes, top down, bottom up is within companies, but we're really excited to see an openness within companies to make it an inside out and outside in approach as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So just to take a bit more of a personal tack with the questions, I guess. I'd like to know, have you always wanted to change the system within which you're working?
I don't think so, actually. I don't think so. I think I've been really inspired by the people that I've had a chance to work with at Volans. I graduated business school and ended up in a sort of traditional management consulting path, and I think that really sort of focused me at that stage in my life in sort of more of a traditional consulting role, where it's about thinking about strategy and what you need to do for your clients. And as soon as I made the jump into what we do at Volans, it was almost like a whole different part of my brain got activated. So I can't say that I was always in a systems change mode, but to the point about the people that are around us really being the factors and the fuel that gets us going. The people I've been exposed to through working at Volans are the ones that have really helped us as an organization crystallize our sort of interest in working at the systems level. Maybe as a side addition to that question, I think also in the last 5.5 years that we've been around at Volans, I think we really have seen an evolution happen where, when we first started working, Volans is only sort of 5.5 years old. And when we first started, that was when social entrepreneurship was really, the it factor, and everyone was talking about the importance of social entrepreneurs. And that's still there, I think, but there really seems to have been a marked transformation in the conversations where the reason why people are interested in what social entrepreneurs are doing is because social entrepreneurs represent individuals who have the capacity of thinking about the system in a different way. And so, it's been fascinating to see how those social entrepreneurs that really truly are, developing business and organizations that are totally disrupting existing systems are the ones that seem to be really flying high right now. And that, I think, is pulling with it the whole development of the system entrepreneur and the system change element is sort of following these individuals that are actually walking the talk. And I think about the Khan Academy as a great example. Here's a social entrepreneur that has created an alternative to the education system in the U.S. And from his organization going live and developing its following, it's actually now putting a lot of pressure on the traditional education system in the U.S. and actually, in fact, globally. So there's a social entrepreneur who had an idea, but the impact of his idea is changing an entire system that's out there.
That's really interesting. And what kind of personal challenges do you feel that you face doing this kind of work?
Knowing where to stop.
To stop?
Yeah, and probably to start too, but the first thing that came to my mind was knowing where to stop. I think systems in nature, continue to branch out. And my fear is that unless you can contain it in some way, you can't actually move forward. And so when we're talking about systems change, I think it's a very personal challenge, is, knowing where the market research, the mapping, the landscaping actually needs to be held in some level of static space so that we can actually start then galvanizing people around some of the nodes or some of the points of leverage. But that's really difficult because, by putting a barrier around it, you're actually doing what you shouldn't do in systems change, which is, creating, some form of boundary. So that's one of my personal challenges. I think there's also a personal side of it as well, which is knowing when to stop. This stuff is really invigorating, and it feels really challenging and stimulating, and it feels like we can start to make some movement, so knowing when to stop working and start enjoying life with young kids and that whole work-life balance thing is also another personal challenge.
Yes.
I believe in work-life blends now, which is where if you're lucky enough to have a job that allows you to do the kinds of things that fulfill you so much, as well as, you know, an opportunity to have some sort of flexibility around how you work, then you can create a really interesting personal and professional blend space. But that's a whole other conversation to have.
So I've only got a few questions left. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so how do you balance the desire to meet kind of enormous goals with practical action?
I won't have any brilliant ideas on that. I think we're still trying to figure that out within Volans. I guess a lot of what we do what enables us to do what we do is working in partnership. And so, you know, we want to make things really pragmatic and practical. And so oftentimes we recognize our role is around catalyzing conversations, providing some level of convening, bringing in together different parts of the network that may not know each other, but then turning it over to those experts, turning it over to the people that understand the dynamics of that particular system really well. Having just had, you know, a really interesting meeting today with, you know, one of the heads of sustainability at ACCA. We're doing this Breakthrough Capitalism event in Canada next month, and one of our sessions is called Accountants Will Save the World. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea is, you know, how can we enable and inspire the accounting industry to sort of take a sort of more active leadership role, something that obviously the Finance Lab knows and loves very, very well. And but, you know, in having these conversations with the people that we want to bring around the table with this very sort of action centricity, you know, critical to the overall convening and how we're setting it up, we have to acknowledge that at Volans we're not accountants. We can put some sort of frameworks in place, and we can, you know, facilitate a conversation, and we can catalyze it by setting sort of some of these bigger systems challenges into a hopefully an action-centric sort of framing. But we really are going to depend on the people from ACCA, from the local accounting bodies, from, you know, the professional industry standards boards, and from the big companies that commission the accounting work to actually get in that room and figure out what they do together. Then Volans will come back in and help sort of make sure that there's a process in which that can be actually activated into an action plan or a roadmap or a mapping exercise. But I think really it's knowing where our value is and where being very specific around what our niche is, and then working in partnership with those people that can do the other important parts of the pragmatic, how do we make this actually a practical part.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, and finally then, what haven't I asked you that is interesting or important?
You know, what really makes me excited about what we do at Volans is our team. And I think we have a really unique one where we have, on one side, John Elkington, who's got, you know, decades of experience working in sustainability, working within corporations, really working at a systems level, before the systems thinking and system level conversations were really happening. And you pair that with some of the people that are on our team that are in their 20s. You know, Amanda Feldman, who is one of our directors, is in her 20s, and she brings this whole wealth of information about what's happening at a system at a very different level. And I kind of sit in the middle as sort of a Gen Xer, but we have this really great intergenerational dialogue. Dialogue is sort of too conceptual a term, actually. I mean, we work together as an intergenerational team, which means we're able to pull a lot of the experience that John has and pair that with, you know, the ideas, the technology that Amanda is able to bring to the table, and we're able to have that all collide in a really cool collegial way at Volans, where there's really no hierarchy. Like, everyone's voice has something really meaningful to contribute and is treated equally. So I think that's what allows us to do what we do in a really unique way, is because we have this rich diversity on our team.
That's fantastic. Thank
you
so much, Charlotte.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Was there anything that I should have hit on that
brilliant. You completely covered everything that, you know,
Okay.
I just think it's an interesting addition. I don't know how you think it compares to the other, because it's quite different, I think, from the other thing.
Yeah. As in earlier today, we had someone who was very academic based, but also talked about sustainability the way you did. It's interesting, saying about how essentially the social network as well as the business network can relate back to ecology as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems to be like the consumer demand seems to be pushing into the corporation to make them do this, and now they're also interested to try and keep ahead of the curve. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because I'm not like, I don't read any of the academic stuff on systems change. Like, I hate to admit it. I follow like
I
what
think
you
that's
guys
really
do at
common.
Finance Lab.
I think that's really a common thing, though. Actually,
I can't read it. I just don't
No.
understand it.
No.
It's like brain, like I tried reading Dana Meadows at one point and it just like blew my mind. Hopefully that's not being recorded. I haven't read anything on systems change.
No,
But
but I actually think that's a really common thing,
Yeah.
because actually when you're doing the practice of it is very, very different from the theory.
well, and I think actually the theory can be a barrier to get into the practice. Because I mean, like when I've tried to read this stuff, just like it literally blows my mind, and it
Yeah.
makes me feel. It's almost like it creates an analysis paralysis. Like,
Yeah.